If you do any prospecting with LinkedIn, you have got to go get set up with Surf. That's SURFE. It's a tool you can use to add new contacts to your CRM system directly from LinkedIn in seconds. I'm using it every single day. I add contacts, follow my deals, keep track of notes, and it ends up saving me a bunch of time on prospecting and outreach, which means I can spend more time moving my deals along. The data is always 100% accurate since I don't have to copy and paste all the fields over from each and every contact that I want to put in my CRM. Instead, Surf does that all automatically with just one click in about 60 seconds. The team over at Surf has put together a very special offer for fans of sales players. There's a link down in the show notes, and you can use the promo code JWSurf5. Don't forget the E at the end of Surf. That's JWSurf5 for 5% off your first year. Don't spend another minute doing things manually. Go get set up with Surf. All right, I'm really excited to introduce today's guest. His name is Chase Barmore. Chase is a business development representative at What Converts, and he's formerly the founder and co-owner of Life Bar, which was a small business, a smoothie bar actually. And then before that, he was the founder of Ready Valet, all small businesses. The topic of today's show is on transitioning into SaaS sales from doing something else. And Chase is actually a fan and listener of the podcast, and he reached out to me. We got connected and worked on some different things. And I invited him on the show because I thought his story was super interesting and relevant to many of you out there who listen, who are trying to transition from doing something else into tech sales. And Chase is a lot of fun. He actually had sent me a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, which I enjoyed a glass of on the show. We recorded this late on a Friday night, and we had a lot of fun talking. He's just full of energy, someone who's really hit the ground running in the SaaS industry. And so he's going to share a little bit about that transition from doing something else, entrepreneurship, into tech sales. And yeah, welcome Chase to the SaaS Sales Players. All right, we are officially live. Chase, absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Glad to be here, Jesse. So glad.
Yeah, so I was just we were just talking offline. It's Friday evening. Let's call it Friday evening. We're in different time zones, Chase and I, but it's basically Friday evening. And a couple months back, Chase and I worked on some coaching, if you will, if you want to call it that. We worked together on some coaching, and as a thank you, Chase is based in Kentucky, so he sent me a really nice bottle of smooth Kentucky bourbon. And I figured what better time to open that up and have a couple of sips than a Friday afternoon podcast with Chase. So thanks for the bottle, and thanks for coming on the show to share your story with us.
Hell yeah. Woodford Reserve.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Like, where from? Remind me, are you in Lexington? Is that or
No, I'm actually in Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville?
So
okay.
We're the home of Muhammad Ali, Louisville Slugger baseball bats, Kentucky Derby, and KFC. That's what we're known for.
KFC. And I'm seeing more and more tech stuff pop up in Kentucky. In fact, I was just looking at some open job openings, not for myself, by the way, but helping some people I'm working with. And I've seen stuff in Kentucky. I'm seeing stuff in Indianapolis, which isn't too far away. So it's cool for me to see these we'll call them secondary tech hubs. I don't even think of them as secondary tech hubs, but just alternative tech hubs to Seattle or San Francisco or New York. It's good to see these other cities starting to have more opportunity. And it seems like you're in a great spot where you're at now, and you're doing some big things we'll definitely get into here on the show. But before we get there, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, just to give the audience some context on how we got connected. Maybe you want to tell that story, but how do we know each other?
How do we know each other? Well, Chase came to let's see. I'm calling myself a recovering small business owner turned SaaS sales executive. Yeah. So me and Jesse, we met at the very end stage of one of my ventures called Life Bar. And I actually talked to one of my Shopify reps, and I was tired of just burning cash. And I was like, hey, Kieran, what should I do? And she's like, Chase, I would suggest you to go into SaaS. And I was like, I don't really even understand what SaaS is. So I go on to Audible or whatever podcast you listen to. What else do? I type in SaaS sales. And then I came across this great podcast called SaaS Sales Player.
Wow.
And that's how I found Jesse. And I listened to all his episodes. I was DoorDash driving. And so I just like
Nice.
drilled down all the episodes. And then I was like, you know what? I think it might be worth it for me to cold outreach this guy and see if I can land him and see if he could help me land a job. And I would say that you did. You really helped me to understand, because I have no tech background. I'm like a non-technical founder turned SaaS sales executive.
That's so awesome. So a couple things. One, I'm glad you mentioned Audible specifically, because Audible is of the streaming platforms that I have the show on. That one came later, and it took quite a while before Amazon reached out to me and said, you officially have enough listeners or volume or whatever to host on Audible. And so I got a cold email from, it wasn't even a person. I think it was just like an automated email from Audible that said, hey, your show's not hosted on the Audible network. And I had never even considered, I always think of Audible as audiobooks. So I hadn't considered it as a place where people might search for podcasts. And I was happy to go in and register the show in there. And I think that only happened maybe a few weeks or months before we got connected. So it's cool to hear that. Also glad to hear that you found some value in the show, and you listened to hours of me droning on while you did your DoorDash runs, but also was super interested in your story, just because it's cool to see folks like yourself come from being a small business owner, entrepreneur, who want to now jump into this space. And you had a lot of knowledge about how SaaS could be implemented practically, right? As a business owner and as someone who actually made decisions about software, you had that side of the coin all covered. And so what we worked together on was just, crafting that story of, why does that make you a great SaaS seller? Well, I've been on the buyer side, and now I know exactly what it takes to implement something and make it successful and see ROI from it. So I'm super glad you reached out. And to anybody out there listening, please reach out, because I'm always happy to help with those kind of things. And please reach out and get in touch, because I genuinely enjoy it and have a lot of fun with it. And Chase specifically has been, an awesome person to have in my network. And I'm really glad we've stayed in touch. And that's why I said, you ought to come on the show, because I think there's enough people out there listening that are maybe in the same space. Maybe they weren't even business owners, though. Maybe they're just in another industry, working another kind of job, but want to explore the world of SaaS sales. And I thought you'd be a great person to come and share that story.
And one of the things that I think so much, I mean, and it's amazing that I know you just put this podcast out to the universe, and you never know who's going to affect, but it did really affect my life. And one of the things that I didn't understand about SaaS, because I had a valet company before, and basically we did recurring revenue sales at restaurants and hotels and private events. So I understood the revenue model, but the thing that I didn't realize, and what you really helped me to understand, is all the different acronyms and what each position is doing. So like what an SDR is, what an AE is, what a BDR is, and how to actually go into the interview and speak that language and see exactly what those either COOs or whoever's the hiring manager, what are they looking for?
Yeah. So answer this for us, because I think, again, there's a lot of people out there listening that might be looking to transition into SaaS sales. They probably are doing the exact same thing you did, which is they're Googling or they're searching their podcast streaming network or their Audible account for SaaS sales content. How did you then, once we worked together, because if I remember right, by the time we started working together, you already had a couple of at-bats. You were already talking to a couple of SaaS companies. I know you'd been through a couple of interview rounds. You and I worked on a couple of intros to some. There was some interest in going to places like Shopify because you had purchased Shopify in your past. But how did you go about honing in on the right companies? Because you've landed at a great one, and it seems like you're doing really well there. What was your methodology for sort of picking a SaaS company to start kind of prospecting into, basically?
And this is really what I wanted to, that I understood. Like basically, you always hear this, and I've been self-employed for 15 years. I always heard, if you don't have a job, you got to make that your job to find a job. Right. So I was just chumming my resume, before I even found you, I went on to LinkedIn and I found an expert resume writer. So I rebuilt my resume, and I would say that was first step one.
Sure. Phase one.
Phase one
of the Chase transformation.
of the Chase transformation. But also, like what you were saying before, Louisville and this whole region, it actually has a name for it. It's called Flyover Country. And there's actually a networking group that's called Flyover Media Group or something, but they have all these networking events with tech industries in Lexington and Louisville and Indianapolis. And so I just started cold outreaching these people and saying, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I just wanted to get into SaaS. And what would you suggest me to do? Do you know anybody? And a lot of people would take meetings with me. I also, this is a pro tip. I set up a Calendly link to book meetings. And that was, I kept iterating on every interview. I don't know how many interviews I was on. And one of my things that I wanted, me and my wife, we discussed, is basically I want to be fully remote so I can actually work anywhere in the world. And I have these weird things now called weekends, which that's like an added benefit. I've never had weekends in my life.
As a small business owner, you probably don't get a lot of, especially in the industries you're in, valet and
valet,
retail and stuff.
Smoothie bar.
Yeah. Hospitality for sure.
Yeah. And so I go ahead.
Yeah, just a real quick question about the Calendly. So did you just go sign up for like a free Calendly or a paid one? I think that's a little hack that I think gets slept on a little bit, is, the back and forth friction of like getting a meeting with somebody. And I use Calendly for everything now, both in my day job and with the podcast and with the coaching that I do and things like that. So yeah, did you just set up a free one, or?
No, I went full in. I mean, it's only $15 a month.
Yeah.
And then this is another pro tip, is I paid for the LinkedIn. I think it's called the hiring thing. I don't know what it is. It's not
premium
sales navigation. LinkedIn Premium, where you can actually see who is looking at your profile, and then you get a few end mails that you can then, cold outbound. And I didn't realize before I talked to you about recruiters, and you really helped me understand that these companies have recruiters, and also there's people in your network that could potentially work at these places of business, and they will get a referral bonus for referring you to them.
Yeah, those are a couple of the biggest hacks that I've found in SaaS for anyone out there listening that's trying to figure out a way to get in, is using third-party recruiters, and there's a lot of them, and they're heavily incentivized to hire sales reps. In fact, they can make thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in many cases when they place an account executive or a sales leader or an SDR even. And so they have this financial interest in helping people get jobs. And then there's this added benefit of they add a little value along the way. And I've found that the best recruiters that I've worked with spent time coaching me to get the role and told me all the insides and outs. And the other added benefit is, let's say you have some scars on your resume. I'll call them scars. And I think we all have something like that. Maybe it was a short stint at a company. Maybe it was a year out of work. Maybe it was a business venture that went south, whatever it is. Everybody has something that they're probably not super proud of on their resume. I shouldn't say everybody, but I think most people probably have something like that. Mm-hmm. And I had a recruiter once tell me, you don't have to worry about that stuff, because I'm going to go in as a intermediary between you and this hiring manager, and I'm going to be able to polish up your story for you and address the problems, so you don't have to, because you having to address those may come across as defensive, or there's a little bit more of a credibility issue in that case. Whereas if the recruiter just says, hey, here's why there's a 1-year gap on this guy's resume, it's because of this. It's a little bit easier then to go in and just clean up the conversation. So that's one hack. And then, the other hack you mentioned was most of the big tech companies have a referral program, and that's a way to save money on recruiting too. Because if you refer somebody that you know or work with or is in your network, they'd rather pay you a couple $1,000 than pay, $20,000 or $30,000 to an outside recruiter. And so you can also use that as a way to get into a lot of the top tech companies and start networking with other reps who work at those companies that are willing to refer you. So I think that's, good call outs. Cause those are,
Yeah. I mean, LinkedIn, I have to say LinkedIn is gold, and LinkedIn is not paying me to say that. I mean, LinkedIn has connected me to so many people. Yeah. Yet, LinkedIn, if you're out there, my name's Chase Barmore. Just follow me. I pay.
Yeah.
Or at
I'm a
least my
customer.
company pays.
Yeah.
I'm a customer, but and thank goodness, I have to say, over the years of me being an entrepreneur, I'm really glad that I kept connecting with people. So I already had a really robust LinkedIn profile, and it was really deep with connections. I wasn't very active on it, but I always connected with people on it. So then when I decided to get a job, I really started to cold reach out to people, book meetings with that Calendly, just to have coffee or just to have a Zoom meeting. And it was amazing. And guess what? It helped me land this job because I actually got a cold inbound message from What Converts from Craig. And I made it so simple for them to book a meeting with me. I said, hey, here's a link to my Calendly. They booked a meeting. And then the follow-up, here's the link. And then boom, you just make that, it's just like sales. You make that process so non-friction. You take all the friction off of it. It's like a conversion funnel, just getting a job.
How do you think they found you at what converts? Because again, this is a question I get a lot from listeners, especially my listeners who have a whole career before they got into tech sales or are trying to get into tech sales, and they maybe have 10 years in another field. They're like, how do I get people to reach out to me? I can't even get people to return my calls when I apply. What do you think got the attention of the guys over at What Converts?
I don't know this exactly, but I do know that I was so what I know from my history with Life Bar is we did a lot of engagement with Instagram. And so on Instagram, you can get engagement or more organic reach when you engage with posts. And this is really true on LinkedIn. So if you actually can have genuine conversations with people, it starts to boost your ranking. So I was going to all the top leaders. I would follow just about everybody on your platform that spoke on your podcast. I would reach out to them. Reached out to Trish, the lady who wrote a book. I bought her book and I read it all. That thing changed my life. The SDR playbook. Sales development playbook. It's right over there.
One of the best books for anyone who wants to learn how to prospect well, for sure. If not the best book.
And just understanding the whole philosophy. And so I think I don't understand in LinkedIn, it gives you those, that data of where you found in a search, you're found in a search. So I think they might've found me in a search result. I had that open a network thing on my little badge. I don't know if that helped. Looking, maybe that was it. I don't know, but they just landed in my inbox. And then I looked at the company and I was like, okay, I went to G2 Reviews. I did an interview on them basically before I even went to them. And this was even before this recession happened, or I guess it was sort of, like March. The recession started to happen. The crash hadn't really happened fully, but I was like, going into this as well, I really wanted to work for a bootstrapped company that hadn't had a lot of VC money, because I knew that if the recession was coming, the VC funds, or they're going to dry up and they're going to make cuts. And that's happened now.
Talk to us a little bit about that. That's a topic I haven't gone into enough detail on the show. And it's one that between us and everyone who's listening, I've recorded a couple of episodes, just me talking about my thoughts on like VCs and equity in a startup, and like the different, the pros and cons of going to a venture-backed SaaS company, because it's pretty prevalent it's obviously very prevalent in the industry. And I think it's actually really interesting that you called that out, that you say that you specifically targeted a bootstrap company. To my knowledge, I don't think I've ever worked for a bootstrap company, but I've always thought, man, someday either I'm going to bootstrap my own company or I'm going to go work for a bootstrap startup. So what, besides sort of the macroeconomic recession type risks and things like that, was there anything else that sort of drove your interest in going to a bootstrap company versus a venture backed one?
One of the main things that I was seeking out is basically I had an issue in Life Bar. So basically the problem that I had with Life Bar, shifting from a brick and mortar juice and smoothie bar to online, was my CPA, my cost per acquisition. And I went with a really poor marketing agency that
Yeah.
blew like $10,000 in 1 month, didn't give me any information, totally was just like, hands up, you should have all this information in your Shopify channel. And I was really unhappy. And then I
Yeah.
went down the path with Facebook ads. The iOS 14 update happened. Didn't help that we had hemp and we had maca in our products. So our ad accounts would
Oh.
always get flagged.
Oh
So
man.
I was just really always at like, how do these digital customers work? How do these D2C sites work? How do these marketing agencies work? And so I actually, this is what Converts did. And it's like, they are able to help with marketing attribution. And so I was like, you know what? I really want to learn about this. And I
Yeah.
really want to we work with marketing agencies across the whole world. And I wanted to work with transparent marketing agencies. So that was one of the facts that I just wanted to learn personally for myself. So I would actually understand how this world works. Did that answer your question? I mean, I'm sort of going off on a tangent,
No,
but the
no, it's
bootstrapped,
cool.
I mean, the
Yeah.
bootstrapped aspect is really, I don't know. I'm just I bootstrapped both of my businesses. I never had
Yeah.
any investors, and I'm working with some startups here locally. And I'm now in the startup ecosystem in Lexington and Louisville. I actually
Yeah.
had lunch with Patrick Parker last week
Yeah. Awesome.
or this week. And, you know, it's amazing to see what's going on in the industry. But it's like, what the question in my mind is, do you have sales? Like, are you able to sell
Right.
your product?
Right.
And I think that that's a really difficult thing to do
And
for a
if
lot
I
of these
remember,
founders.
if I remember right from my conversation with Patrick, he's had several startups and he's bootstrapped all of them. Also, he hasn't raised any outside funding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
He's a bootstrap funder, you know, and he's in Lexington. And I mean, that guy is just a
Yeah.
powerhouse.
Yeah, he was great to talk to. Super, super talented guy and had a lot of cool stuff to share. Let
Another connection you gave, Jesse, was
yeah,
that guy. I just called out. I didn't even know he was in Lexington. I was like, I didn't even know all this tech stuff was in Kentucky. You know, we're
yeah.
in the middle of the United States, but there's a lot of tech where we're at.
I think it's cool that they're leaning into the flyover thing. And again, this is coming from several years ago. I worked for an Indianapolis-based startup, and I loved it. It was awesome. The culture was totally different. I've since worked for Bay Area startups and New York startups and Austin startups, but one of my favorite cultures, if not my favorite culture, was my company that I worked for in Indianapolis, because everybody was just so freaking genuine and it was fun, and everyone's a little more relaxed. Not not to be taken as like not hardworking. They're extremely hardworking. They just maybe didn't take themselves so seriously, and I found that to be pretty fun. I think if I had to pick a coastal city to work for, to have a company based in, I do like New York companies compared to Bay Area. Sorry for my former Bay Area employers, but I like folks in New York are pretty cool. East Coast, even though I'm pretty far on the West Coast, but I want to take it back to kind of the venture thing, just to provide some context for anyone who's listening, who's trying to figure out, do I follow Chase's lead and go hunt down a list of bootstrap companies in my city, or should I go look at a venture-backed startup? Now, it is going to be easier to find venture-backed startups because there's so many of them. Most of the time, SaaS gets venture capital. It's a pretty big part of our culture in the SaaS industry. And there's, it's funny, I didn't understand why that was for many years until I joined an early startup in Austin. And the founder told me, he said, the risk in not raising capital at an early stage company is that someone will beat you to market, or someone will become the category leader in the market faster than you can by bootstrapping. Now, he was a Bay Area guy who had moved to Austin, and he had that it's a very much like Bay Area mindset. So if you look at a lot of the San Francisco based startups historically, whether, we're talking the last 22 years, historically there's been more emphasis put on innovation and hyper growth than what you're talking about, which is, are you selling? Is it profitable? Can you break even on this? Can you pay people well? Those kind of things. And, because the cost of living in say San Francisco or maybe New York is so high, you do have to focus on just this rapid growth and continuing to raise money to be able to afford to grow to the amount of employees. So I can see the pros and cons of both. From a sales rep standpoint, if you're looking to decide your next career move, or if you're trying to break into the industry, I think try both things out, try both cultures out. What you will find, and again, I'm kind of biased because I've pretty much only been in venture-backed companies or publicly traded companies. The early venture companies, the VCs are going to guide some of the culture in that company. They're going to guide some of the targets, which that's the part that I think causes a lot of friction for us sellers. Is no one wants to think that some guy or gal with a Harvard MBA in a boardroom somewhere, maybe in a coastal city somewhere, pretty much threw a dart at a dartboard and said, the quota should be 1 million, or the quota should be 10 meetings a month for the SDRs or 50 meetings a month for the SDRs. That person, having never sat in a sales seat, maybe they have a nice fancy MBA degree hanging on the wall, but they're making decisions about a SaaS startup based on industry data, right? Instead of practical experience or actual, in the chair results that they've achieved. So that's something to think about. The later you get to a startup, the less that really matters, because you're not going to if you're joining like a 500 person company or even a 300 person company, you're not going to really have to think about the VCs or the venture capitalists that are involved with the company. But if you're coming into a very early stage company that has, under 50 employees, those VCs are going to be a big part of that culture, and they're going to guide the metrics in the business and the goals, and that impacts your quota. And it's going to impact a lot of things, like the direction that the marketing team decides to go in terms of how they invest their budget. So pros and cons to both. I think it's really cool. I think it's really cool that you're in a bootstrap company, and I've always wanted to work for one. I just haven't yet found the right one, but I know that there's some really solid ones out there that they don't need to worry about that innovation risk, right? Because they have a strong, break-even business, or they're profitable and they're growing, and they don't need to worry about the technology innovation component that, historically startups worried about, and especially the ones out of San Francisco. So anyway, long rant, try both out, but I'm probably going to do a whole podcast episode at some point on, VCs and what does your equity actually mean when you're a SaaS sales rep. There's a couple of people that have talked about this a lot in the industry, which, the one perspective is that early sales reps and startups tend to get a little bit hosed when it comes to ownership in the business. They should own a lot more of the startup. So anyway, I'm ranting on here.
I love it. Well, I mean, and I would also say, like, utilize, if you do have access to the VCs, like I actually have relationships with a bunch of different VCs, and it's like, those are great people to know, and they can make introductions for you, and you can lean into those relationships if you are able to create them to open doors for yourself in sales. And so I don't ever want to burn the bridge if possible. And it's like, utilize anybody in the organization. If you follow them on Instagram or whatever, wherever their social channels are, or if they hang out, maybe they're at a country club. It's like, get you involved in those deals. Get the conversation going.
Man, you're way ahead of your game. You're so far into this game. It's brilliant advice. Because even though you're new to tech, you know business so well. And I think that's a great piece of advice that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about. And I don't want to make it seem like it's super easy to go out and network with VCs. It can be, there's a little bit of gatekeeping that can go on. It's a little bit hard to make those connections. VCs are very busy people. They have massive portfolios, some of them, and they may or may not take time to go meet with a sales rep, but look for those opportunities. To your point, look for those opportunities. And, think about it this way. If you have connections who are VCs, the next time you're looking for a sales opportunity or a sales management opportunity, that person is connected to, maybe hundreds of different tech businesses. And if you're in their sphere of influence, they're going to think of you at some point, whether that's to come in and be an advisor, to come in and lead a sales team, or build a sales team from the ground up. There's so many like benefits and dividends that pay out from being connected to VCs. Again, it's really hard to do. One way that I've done that, so find out in your city where they hang out at. You just said, you know, what country
Yep.
club do they go to? So I'm not
Or
going to say
networking event, you know, it's like they're at free networking events. You just
they're
got to
at
go to the
networking
right
events.
ones.
There's a place in Austin. I'm not going to call out the business here on the air because I'll probably end up pissing some people off, but there is a coffee shop in Austin that is known for, you know, you walk in there on any given weekday morning, you are sitting amongst, you know, probably dozens, at least a dozen VCs. So if you're in Austin, figure out where that's at and go hang out there. Go take your laptop there and have a cup of coffee. You know, look up every so often and make eye contact with people, and you never know, you'll probably end up striking up some kind of a relationship. And I think, you know, the same can be said for most cities, right? And to your point, there's even a network in you know, Louisville, and I can say there's stuff here where I'm at in Phoenix, right? So find out where you can go, what networking events, and then, you know, just start connecting.
And one of the benefits, and I'll share this, like this is something I didn't realize, it's post-COVID that I learned about this, but the SBA has a lot of free access to different organizations. So there's the SBDC, which every city has the SBDC, and they have a coach. They'll talk to you about your small business, but there's like GLI, Greater Louisville Inc. here in Louisville, Startup Grind. I went to some of their meetings. One of the first meetings I went to was this startup called Go Wild Louisville or Go Wild Kentucky, and they're a social media platform. And it's like, you never know who you're going to meet. And that first meeting that I took, it was probably 4 months ago. There was a prospect that I was prospecting that was one of my first days. I think I've only been in this role about a little over 100 days, but it took that amount of time for me to close a big ICP client. But it took a lot of different touch points. And I'm like doing a bunch of different things of just showing up and just really, I think people think remote work means you just stay in your house. That's not true. It means you got to leave. You got to go talk to people. You got to show face. I'm old school. You know, it's like, I like to talk to people. I went to Lexington on Wednesday. I had 6 meetings that I booked. It took me 3 months to book one of these meetings.
Wow.
But it was great. And you know what? I asked the lady, I said, you know, it took me 3 months to get this meeting. And she's like, you know what? I really appreciate you showing up in person. No one ever does that anymore.
This is actually something I want to get better at too. I definitely have tried to leverage the fact that I'm in the city that I'm in, particularly because the prospects that I tend to sell to are based here. It's a hotbed for contact center leaders, which is who I sell to in my day job. And I've tried to definitely leverage my geo advantage. Are you just going on LinkedIn and you're finding, you know, local people that you're able to drive to? This is huge because pre-pandemic, this is how big deals got done. It's still more or less how big deals get done. But I think a lot of people are hesitant to get back into in-person meetings, coffee meetings, lunch meetings, whatever. How are you finding these? Is it just through LinkedIn or
well,
talk to
and
us about that?
I'll tell you a little bit about my history. So I had a valet company, and you know, I did probably 500 events a year, and we here in Louisville, Kentucky, have the Kentucky Derby. So there's like huge galas, celebrities come.
Sure.
But at these events, this is where the big deals get done. And I saw so many deals with the mayor, with whoever, big companies. It's all done at a party. It's who knows who. And so I was in this, I use that in my mindset now, but really I would say, how do you find that out? You find out your local startup scene. You try to, like, I got involved with this flyover group. They then led me to this startup breakfast, which is tied up to University of Kentucky. I then went from there and I got involved with Endeavor, which is a nonprofit founders organization. They then took me on an Indy tech tour that I went to see all the tech hubs in Indianapolis, and I met 3 founders at every one of these places. I then kept following up with people. I reactivated old connections, and I just had that Calendly link, and I just kept sending it out and saying, hey, would you be willing to have 15, 30 minutes of my time? And it's amazing how many people are like, yeah, I'll do 30 minutes. And of course, those meetings last a lot longer than 30 minutes. And
Yeah.
those people want to help you succeed.
When you're building in-person rapport with potential prospects or whatever, future employers, whatever relationship you're trying to build, that in person goes a really long way. And, look, I love working from home. I love being able to do a lot of things through Zoom and not have to necessarily rush out the door every single morning to get somewhere, or have to commute or sit in traffic. But you're exactly right that there's a huge competitive advantage in getting on site, getting those coffee meetings. That's super cool, man. You're a real life rainmaker. I mean, you're out there, you're pulling all the different strings to figure out where you can make it rain. And you're not just focused on sort of the standard sales channels, because, and this is, I'm going to go on another rant here. This is why more SaaS companies, they need to look at more people like Chase Barmore, who comes from a different industry, who comes from an entrepreneurial background, not just, the kind of traditional get out of college and become an SDR and go down the very traditional software path, because you're doing things that most people don't even think to do, because they're just told from the beginning of their career that if you just make enough dials and you send enough in-mails and you send enough emails, you'll hit your number. And the reality is, you and I both know, you can do everything right in business, and it doesn't mean that you're going to get to the right result. You have to keep, you have to keep reaching out. You got to keep innovating. You got to keep finding that new channel for business. So I think it's really cool that you're like pulling out all the stops to get stuff going.
Well, and one of the things, and I'll share this with you. This was one of the big wins when I started with What Converts, and I told them, I gave them pretty high numbers, and I was like, I will close an ICP very soon, outbound, do a full outbound prospect if you hire me. And the first thing that I did when I started at What Converts, I went on to Reddit. And I went under PPC, and I typed in our competitor. We're in the call tracking platform software.
Sure.
And all these people were having issues on Reddit. So then I started to go with posts on these with these people and say, hey, have you heard of What Converts? Or, this is a product that I've been using. I've seen a lot of success. 3 weeks later, I get an outbound call. And this guy says, you know what? Somebody from What Converts called or was on Reddit and was talking about your all's product. And I'm with company X and I want to switch. And I was like, well, man, that's me. I was that person on Reddit.
Dude, I've never used Reddit. I've gone on R sales in Reddit, and I've contributed to that community, but I've never thought to use Reddit as like a sourcing pool for leads. That's wow. That's such a great story.
and that guy was an ICP, closed him. He's happy. He's still with us. And that just shows that sometimes your prospects are hanging out in different areas. And you really have to think like, how is your prospect? Where are they hanging out at?
Yeah.
And maybe your prospect is hanging out at, I don't know. I used to be a really big into yoga and into spinning. Like I did Cycle Bar and Soul Cycle. Sure. But I love those myself, but I would be able to prospect people in that room just because we hung out together and we worked out together or sweated in a hot yoga room together. It's like, you never know when you're prospecting, and it's like, I'm not cold selling everybody. I am just adding value to people's lives, and I'm a connector.
So I love that too. And again, it can be, there's different use cases. It can be applied to your selling, generating leads, building relationships with prospects. But I also think it goes for finding career opportunities. Cause a story that I've been meaning to tell on the show and post about is how a few years ago, I was riding my bike on a trail in Austin and met the founder, actually the same founder who was talking to me about why, companies raise money, pretty much hired me right on the spot on a bike ride through a rural trail in Austin, near Austin, mountain biking. And we shared that common interest, and we were riding together, and, he said, let's meet for coffee on Monday. I need to hire somebody for a sales role, and I really like you, so let's do this. And then, Monday coffee meeting happened. We had a plan for how we were going to hit the ground running. And, within a few weeks I was making significantly more. It was a huge raise. And it was really cool to go and say, man, a hobby of mine, something that I was just randomly doing, to your point, like with yoga and cycling and things like that, look around in your network, because there's probably people that are willing to hire you. There's people that are going to be willing to buy from you. There's people that want to, give you money or equity in their business to help consult them. Like there's just too much opportunity out there to not be like looking around, even when you're just going about your kind of day-to-day hobbies and stuff, whether that's cycling or yoga or mountain biking or whatever it is, golfing, rally cars, whatever it is, there's probably someone in your sphere that's prepared to buy from you or hire you or both,
Yeah. And you don't even have to be like, I'm not like on the bike, like, hey, do you want to buy this now?
Right.
It's like,
Right.
I'm actually living my authentic self. It's like, I'm learning how to row. I'm not doing it for a sales perspective per se,
Yeah.
but a lot of high net worth people do row and do scull. So
Yeah,
it's
for
like,
sure.
that might be an added benefit, but I'm doing it for myself because I want to learn how to crew,
It's a much more natural relationship build, right? When there's some other common ground, and then the conversation does eventually shift to like value adding on both sides, and that's when it just becomes easy to sell the deal. And I've also done, the biggest, I've talked about it a few times before on the show, but the biggest deal I've done in my career really came about because the primary, I wouldn't call him the decision maker, but he was the decision maker's right hand, was based here in Arizona where I'm at. And as soon as I figured that out, I sent him a note and just said, we should go get a beer sometime. I'm not going to try to sell you. We should just go get a beer though and talk. And after that, happy hour that we did, I was on like a text message based relationship with this guy. And that is where you want to be with your buyers, because if you're texting back and forth, and this is great because, for the next 7 months or 8 months with this guy, I was texting back and forth. In that time, we did, 2 different contracts, sold 2 different deals. And then we sold a really big deal, which was the biggest one I've ever sold. And then he called me, or, he texted me a few weeks later and said, hey, get this happens all the time, especially in the enterprise. He said, hey, it's the end of the year. It's December at this point, and I've got budget I've got to dump. And I have to spend my budget or I'll lose it for the next fiscal year. And is there, can we come up with a way for me to give you $100,000? This is a totally true story. And it actually, I had never experienced this before. When I called my boss about it, I was like, he wants to give us another $100,000. And he was like, oh yeah, he's got to dump his budget. He's got to use his budget. It's use it or lose it. This happens all the time. And I was like, I've never heard this before. And
who would do such a thing?
Well, and again, he picked whoever he was, closest with from a relationship standpoint, I think. I mean, there's probably other vendors he could have found a way to spend more with, but he wanted to figure out a way. And, fortunately our pricing model was usage based. So we could say, sure, we'll just add to your usage pool. And, you're welcome to write us another check or sign another order form for, it was, to be fair, it was $97,000. It wasn't exactly $100,000. It was $97,000 to be exact, but you get the idea. And it was just out of nowhere, totally crazy. And so that's the kind of power that you have when you start to get on a text message, cell phone type call basis. When you have that kind of relationship with somebody, not only are they going to push internally to get you your deal done, but when they have budget to dump or they need, new lines of business or whatever it is, they're going to think of you first and shoot you a text or shoot you a call, and you're going to profit on that. So this is cool, man. You're really doing some innovative things, I think, in the space, because you have the perspective of being a business owner. You realize you can't just focus on 2 or 3 channels for outbounding or prospecting or growth, right? Even as a small business owner, you probably didn't just use one medium for advertising. You probably had several channels you were using to promote the business. And I think it's really cool to see how you've taken that into a SaaS career, and you're now finding ways to capitalize on that.
Yeah. And before this, I had to tell a lady on a cold call. I said, I'm sorry, I got to get off to get on this podcast. But I cold called this person. I got a warm intro from a person that I met at a networking meeting. This large marketing agency just cold called me back, and I spent 30 minutes on the phone with this lady. She told me her whole story, and she's like, Chase, I like talking to people that are nice, and sometimes I give information to my upper level management, and sometimes we can do work with you, but sometimes it might be 5 years down the road that I've remember talking to you, and I just refer somebody to you. And that's what I'm just trying to add value to anybody's life, and I love cold calling. Really, it's like, hey, maybe I'll get to talk to somebody today.
Let me ask you this. So you're now in SaaS. You've got an awesome new role. From our talking, and for context for listeners, I have a Slack community going for folks who've done coaching with me. So if you're interested, reach out. But and so we get, fortunately we get some updates from Chase pretty often on, metrics and targets hit and stuff. But what's next for you after this? I mean, your early days at What Converts, but talk to me about talk to me a little bit about what's next in your career in your mind.
What's next? I mean, I'm about 100 days into my SaaS career.
Okay, I thought it was longer than that.
I started in April. I think April 11th was my start date. So maybe it's like 120 days. I don't know yet. So I really love it. I mean, I love this career. I love this career path. And what I wanted to understand was how this sales process worked from an SDR to a BDR to an AE to a CMS.
Yeah.
And just understanding that flywheel and how you could really ramp up sales. Where I see my life, I mean, I really am helping. I've met a few startups here in Louisville, and I'm starting to help them to just understand sales process. Yeah. And I love to do that. I love helping them. And also I really have enjoyed, I'm not in a leadership role at What Converts, but I do enjoy talking to my SDRs or the SDRs on staff. And like, there's one lady, and she's really funny. She's in Texas, and she's like, she had a "what would Chase do" moment. She's like, "What would Chase do?" And she's like, "I went on LinkedIn. It was a Friday night, and I just started outbound and all these people and having these conversations, and I booked 4 meetings." And she's like, "That's awesome. What Chase would do." And I'm like, "Yeah,
it is what I do."
It's like, we just book meetings.
Let me ask this. You're 120 days into the SaaS. Is there anything that surprised you about coming in this, or anything that's kind of turned you off about the industry so far?
I mean, honestly, no.
Okay, that's good to hear.
What's turned me off? Nothing's really turned me off at all. I really enjoy my employer. I enjoy working alongside my 2 co-founders.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, like with my own businesses, with Ready Valet and Life Bar, it was all on my shoulders.
Yeah.
And it's so nice to be able to be like, you know what? I just sold this deal, and you're going to get handed off to an expert implementer who's going to be able to get you onboarded. And then we're going to hand you off to our key account manager, and they are going to make sure that your service is awesome. And I'm able to just continue to follow back up and touch in and be like, "How's your experience been? Can I help you with anything?" And then if they're like, this, I like this, but I needed this to happen, then I can be a liaison to our support team. And I just love having that backup. It's like, this is awesome.
This is one of the reasons that, so when I was younger, my career goal was to be an entrepreneur. I didn't really know what kind of business I was going to start.
Really?
But then I kind of worked my way into this, and I realized, SaaS sales is it's all of the benefits of being an entrepreneur, because you're like you're the CEO of your territory or your account list, as they always say. And I think that that's a cliche now. A lot of sales managers will say you're the CEO of your territory, so be the CEO. But it actually resonates with me. I'm like, yeah, I am that. Another line that a previous CRO that I worked for used to say was, you're a franchise. Think of yourself as a franchise. So like, in your case, you're a franchise of What Converts, right? You have you have messaging and marketing materials, you get some leads, you have a book of business, but you're sort of a regional manager of your own book of business. I think that's a really good way to think about your career in SaaS. So I've not yet started a business, unless you count podcasts as a business.
Oh, you've started a business.
Yeah, true.
You're a coach. You're a coach. It says you got an LLC on there. I don't know if that's, you're a business owner, man.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But for a long time I was, and my primary income comes from just being an account executive. Right. And and that works especially for this podcast, because I wouldn't be able to speak credibly about the day-to-day if I wasn't also doing the day-to-day every single day myself, right? But I think you get all the benefits of being an entrepreneur in this role, because again, you're in charge of your pipeline, you're in charge of your process, but it de-risks some of it too. To your point earlier, you're sleeping a little bit better at night knowing that you don't have the overhead of a valet business, or
you don't have the overhead of payroll expense. Payroll every 2 weeks was just like a mad dash of like, how are we going to make this happen? And that's what a lot of these VC people are thinking about, and that goes back to that question. But yeah, I mean, I love the SaaS world, and really I'm amazed at the business process of the whole sales process. And I think that this sales process is going to morph into more D2C, more like brick and mortar businesses. I see a huge opportunity for just sales of just using this outbounded way of doing things, of how we do it.
What so far in 120 days in, let's call it, has there been any tools besides What Converts? Because you mentioned What Converts has been very helpful in what you're doing, and definitely want to spend some time too talking about what you guys do, so that anyone listening can check you guys out. But are there any other tools you're using that you found to be insanely valuable in building your pipeline?
Insanely valuable has been Sales Navigator.
Okay, cool.
So having that bulk end mail, we have this tool. And thank you, What Converts team, for buying this for us. It's called Lucia. Have you used Lucia yet?
No, I'm going to Google it right now.
So I think Lucia is basically, you can hover over somebody's connection or somebody's profile on LinkedIn, and I can actually get their email address, their personal phone number, and then their work phone number and some more data points. So it's a great way for me to like call up somebody and be like, hey, John, even people that I meet at these networking events that I might not have gotten their information, I can call them up and say, hey, I remember seeing you at Venture Connectors.
Yeah.
You remember me? That's cool. That's been a great tool. Calendly. So that is like I was sort of rogue. I was using Calendly to book demos for our company because our software was difficult. And so I was just trying to bring it down as quickly as possible to book these demos as fast as possible. And I found that Calendly was the best way for me to get my booked demos.
Yeah. No, it takes all the friction out of the back and forth. It's funny because when I started my career, I wouldn't say calendar tools didn't exist, but they weren't, prominent at that point. And so you finally get someone to respond to one of your prospecting emails, and they're like, can you meet next Thursday at this time? And you're like, no, I actually have a conflict at that time. How about an hour later than that time? No, I have a conflict at that time. Sorry. How about the next day? Well, the next day I'm going to be on vacation. So like, as when I was an SDR, we didn't have Calendly, unfortunately. And it used to just be this like nasty back and forth of like,
oh gosh,
when do you get back from your vacation? And then a lot of times they just bump you to their executive assistant. And then, sometimes you could end up still getting the meeting, but then by the time you actually get on the phone with the prospect, they're like, I don't even remember the context behind this. You reached out to me. What do you want? So you're exactly right. The Calendly or whatever. I know Outreach has a calendar booking tool. HubSpot has a calendar booking tool. There's several others.
This is not a sponsored Calendly podcast. We promise. Not yet.
Not yet. But Calendly, if you're listening, send us a check.
That's right.
Make it out to Chase Barmore.
Another thing, and I'll tell you this, Jesse, and this was one of the things that you really talked about on your show, and I didn't know this as a small business owner. I mean, my valet company at its height before I sold it did around $1 million in revenue. We didn't have a CRM system.
That's crazy.
We did it all on Google Docs.
Wow.
Everything was on a Google Docs sheet. And me and my manager, we'd meet at coffee shops, didn't have an office building. It was all from our phone, all from a storage unit, all from the back of my house. My wife hated it. And she's really glad that I no longer do valet. I actually saw one of my valets that I worked with a long time ago, and he's still valeting. Sometimes I miss it. I miss the $100 handshakes. And that is like, if you can consistently get the $100 handshake, I'm going to write about this. I need to write a book on this.
So did I tell you that I used to be a valet when I was
No,
in
you did
college?
not. No.
Yeah, I worked for a company out here. I won't say their name. I think they're a non-operation. They're defunct at this point. But out here in
Okay.
Scottsdale, Arizona, when I was in college,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
a cousin of mine invited me out to do valet stuff. I didn't last very long. For me, I'm not a night owl, and this was a job that would start at like 9 or 10 p.m. because
Oh
that's when
no,
that's
this
when the
was a
bar
nightclub. This must
nightclub
have been a
valet
night.
stuff. Yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah.
yeah,
And
nightclubs are tough.
I'm gonna go ahead and admit this on the air to all my listeners that I'm not a very good driver. I'm not a very good driver. In fact, my wife does most of the driving in our house. I'm like a passenger most of the time. It's not that I don't like driving, and it's not like I
You
don't
got your
like
Tesla to
cars.
do that for you, right?
Not yet.
Okay.
Once Calendly and these other affiliates start paying us, I'll get the Tesla.
And Elon just put
Elon,
us
yeah,
put a little give us a little lease
send
here.
us a Tesla. Yeah, no, that's the goal because I don't enjoy driving. I like cars. I like being in cars. It's fine, but I'm just not very good at driving. It's just a weird thing. And so I wasn't, you can imagine when I got into my first sports car with like paddle shifters, I was like, what the hell is this? I've never like, how do I move this? And then
Oh yeah.
you get in and there's all kinds of like remote starts and
Oh
password
yeah.
protected ignitions and this and that, and then candidly I wasn't very good at manual transmission, so I'm like parking these manual transmission sports cars that are worth more than anything I've ever touched in my life at this time because I was in college, and I'm like stalling these because this is Scottsdale, Arizona, so there's
Yeah.
just
Oh
like a lot
yeah.
of people
Yeah.
with
Oh
like
yeah.
McLarens and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
and whatever Lambos, and I'm like stalling as I'm pulling it up to them to deliver it. But I did get a couple of $100 handshakes, which that is a pretty cool business model when and it was like I think I was probably making like $4 or $5 an hour. I'm not kidding, maybe it was more than that, but it was like some weird loophole where they didn't even have to pay me minimum wage, but because the tips were usually pretty insane on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday night, it didn't really matter because you're bringing home like $1,000 a night and over the weekend nights. So it was a cool job. I didn't last more than a couple of weeks because of the late nights and my problems with driving stick shifts and paddle shifters and that stuff. But it was a good hustle for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, valet is a very interesting. I think it's like a dance. It's
Yeah.
totally, there is a process, and the valets that didn't know how to drive manual, I would always chastise them a little bit. I'd be like, well, you're not going to be able to drive the nice cars, but there is a way. If there's any valets listening out here, if they're moonlighting as a SaaS sales executive, the tip is
Yeah.
for those cars to say, you know what, sir, we're going to keep you in a VIP spot right up front here. You can just park your car right here. I'm going to keep my eyes on it the whole time, won't move it. And I'm just going to keep your keys. It won't move, but you're going to be in my VIP spot. Nobody's going to touch your car. Make sure that you're all taken care of. That right there, even though you don't know how to drive the car, you're showing that customer, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's really taking great care of me.
Yeah.
I mean, I made so much money doing that and training my valets how to do that. It's amazing.
Now you need to come up with a SaaS for valet business owners, like a CRM for valet that maybe has like some kind of mobile app component that like checks the cars in and
Oh, I already dealt with a company that did that, and we had the first, it's like I tried to get money for Ready Valet. It was like I'm seeing a lot of these emails back in like 2015, 2016. I was trying to raise money. I just landed a multi-million-dollar hotel contract.
Oh, wow.
And I was trying to land VC money or any money because the payroll was so high. And basically the tech scene, the people who would give money in Louisville, they were like, well, your valet company's not tech enough. And I'm like, well, you can text and get a car. That's like highly efficient. And we actually use a CRM or like a whatever app to where
Like a
people can
messaging
pre-order
app.
your
Yeah.
car. Yeah. And and we had profit. We were doing like big numbers, no money. So the people like to invest in tech. They don't want to invest in valet. I don't understand it.
Well, it goes back to the point I made earlier that founder had told me in Austin, which was there's an innovation layer in tech. And let me explain this to listeners too, because again, I still haven't fully wrapped my head around this, but I heard it from the mouth of the beast. In other words, a founder himself told me, like, the whole thing about tech, and I think I talked about this on a recent episode too, which is with tech, there's like a sharper growth curve, or there's a sharper valuation curve because of the innovation layer, the innovation component of a business, right? And so, and this explains, like, if anyone's watched the WeWork, there was a WeWork mini series on I think Apple TV. Yeah, We Crashed.
Yeah, that thing's great.
Really great, because the challenge, or the problem, the crux of the problem of all that was Adam Neumann, the founder, wanted to value the business like a tech company, but they were really just a real estate, intermediary in a lot of ways. Like, and there was some tech components to it. Don't get me wrong. We were a WeWork customer for a long time in Austin. The two of the different companies I worked at in Austin had WeWork space, and sure, there was like some tech components to it, but it wasn't a SaaS, and it wasn't, it wasn't like Facebook or Twitter or something like that either. But yet he was, valuing the business, or he had a business valuation that was as if it were some kind of technology, and it really wasn't. And that was where, problems started happening. And so I think that's what it comes down to, is when you do invent a technology, there's like an innovation bonus that values the company way higher. Now, whether that's right or wrong, I'm not going to sit here, one glass into bourbon and decide that. But investors look at a tech company and say, well, yeah. And then with a SaaS company, they look at a SaaS company and they say, there's a subscription element to it, and you're booking, revenue 1 to 3 years out, and there's value in having that longevity. Plus, as the product gets more features and functions, the value grows because you're able to offer more to clients, and clients get sticky, and you get more clients because of better features. And it's just this, like you used the word flywheel earlier. It's a flywheel. So yeah, it is kind of unfortunate. There's like a lot of really great businesses like Valet, or, certain retail type businesses and e-commerce that still don't quite get the same types of valuations as a SaaS company would, because of those, those different components.
And I understand both sides, and anybody that, like you said, the We Crash, that is a great show just to help you. And I say, like, who cares about this founder? I think that it really projects what a founder has to mentally do and what they go through in that process. And it's really amazing to see that process and how he, grew that, and the deals you have to do. And, I've never been in that type of situation, but it was just amazing to see, like, you have to continue to have this grand vision, because that's, you are selling it basically.
Yeah. I haven't formulated a really strong opinion about the WeWork founder. I know it's funny. This is actually kind of timely, because
he's coming back for some.
He's coming back. A16Z, which is Andreessen Horowitz, one of the, essentially the biggest. We've talked a lot on the episode today about VCs. Really, the two biggest VCs in tech are A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, which was founded by Mark Andreessen, the guy who, is kind of like the grandfather of the internet, or the father of the internet, whatever you want to call it. He started like the first browser, right? And then there's Sequoia, which was like the first VC behind Apple. But A16Z just recently came out and said they're going to back, Adam Neumann's next venture. So it's kind of a hot topic this week. I haven't really formulated a full opinion on it. I don't know, like, watching the series was really interesting. To your point, like, he still had to have a pretty big vision. He attracted a lot of really, sharp talent and raised a lot of money. So there must have been something that people saw, but, obviously.
And he was persistent, just like what we were taught. That guy was so persistent, and he would not give up. And he used in-person networking. He was able to add value to those people's lives and really make them feel they felt cared for. And those employees, and very amazing. It's like a whole.
Now, the dark side to that is that, a lot of people were expecting a big payout, and their equity would be worth something. And again, this is a whole topic I've wanted to talk about on the podcast. And I will probably at some point either interview a VC or interview a founder who's had, a mishap, right? Because a lot of times, and I don't see it as much anymore the longer I've been in the industry. Maybe it's just I tune it out more. But when I was early in my career, I joined a couple of startups or early companies that were like, we're going to be the next Facebook, or we're going to be the next Twitter, whatever, they would say, or we're going to be the next Salesforce, or whatever they would say. And they would put so much emphasis on like, someday you're going to be super rich from your stock options. And I think the WeWork guy definitely perpetuated that internally, which was like all the employees thought they were going to somehow become multimillionaires as soon as there was an exit. But then when, the outcome actually happened, everybody got kind of hosed. And so that's where I have mixed feelings on it. I totally think yeah.
And I went to Indianapolis, and this is so interesting with Indianapolis. So there was a company in Indianapolis that got bought out by Salesforce for over $1 billion. It was a startup.
ExactTarget, right?
ExactTarget. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what happened to that whole ecosystem in Indianapolis is all those people from ExactTarget stayed in Indy, and they created different tech hubs. And now Indy is now positioned itself as, it's like the New York of the Midwest. I mean, I think it's number 3 in the country, and like they're getting a lot of VC funds, but there's amazing like startup hubs there now, like 16 Tech. If you haven't heard of them, like if you have an idea, these people want to help you do it. Yeah. And it's like, that's what can happen from an exit. That is good.
The founder of ExactTarget is a huge investor, and I guess you could call him a venture capitalist. I don't really think of him that way, because he founded an amazing company and sold it off, but now he invests, and he's got his hands in a lot of different companies, and he's got a really cool model for offering capital to SaaS startups. It is cool to see one really successful tech exit can alter the shape of a city, right? So in Austin, that dates all the way back to the late 80s when Dell went public. And my understanding is Dell went public with no debt. They were also bootstrapped, if I remember right. They hadn't raised any capital. Went from bootstrap to IPO, and there was some thousands of people, maybe, or at least maybe hundreds of people that became millionaires from that exit. And all of those people, they call them Dellionaires in Austin. All of them are Dellionaires, and they've sort of moved to the west part of Austin. And if you go look, trace back a lot of the other companies that have since been founded in Austin, typically it's someone who was pretty early at Dell that, became a Dellionaire, and then they started another company. And there's a few other stories like that in Austin of IPOs that, minted some new people that could then go out and invest in the ecosystem and stay in the city. And, I can point to a couple of other cities in the US that have stories like that. So it's kind of cool to see, like, it just takes one really successful exit, like ExactTarget for Indianapolis, or Dell for Austin, to create a whole tech ecosystem and, create this stream of capital that then goes into the next wave of startups.
And plug into that. If you're in that city, in any of your cities, I mean, there are startups in your city and they need help. And a lot of times, I guess, what I've found is a lot of these founders don't know how to sell. So if you know how to sell and you can say, hey, I'm willing to help you sell, they probably will bring you on board, and maybe you might get a later down commission. And lead generation is something also that I've been mystified with what converts. I mean, we have a lot of lead generators that use our platform, and I didn't realize lead generation is such a big industry.
Yeah, huge. And I think it's easy to start one of those. So a lot of people try to get into it. So,
well, I've seen some of the big dogs, and it's like, oh man, they're getting a lot. Well, all right, Jesse, I know we're over on time. How are we doing?
We're good. I know it's late. You're a couple hours ahead of me. So it's a Friday night, as I said at the beginning of the show. Any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with the listeners of SaaS sales players? Not last, final words of wisdom for this episode.
Yeah, final word. It's like, we're going to keep going. I really want to thank you, Jesse, for just putting this out there. And I think a lot of people get negative in the tech world, and I think a lot of things are portrayed not as they seem. And everybody in this industry that I have met has been very genuine. And I've been extremely genuine, and just my curiosity of this whole realm And one of the things that I've recently started to understand and doing demos, like I do so many demos and I've met so many different agencies and working with people in the UK, Australia, India, US, Canada, is my speaking ability. And that I can actually, I've started doing Toastmasters recently. This is another interesting free tip if you want to. Have you ever heard of Toastmasters?
I've attended a Toastmasters many years ago. It's one of those things that I need to get back into because I know it's super helpful for public speaking.
Yeah. And now I have like 5 speaking engagements in the next month. So I have to really work on like my public speaking. So I'm just leaning in. I'm just leaning into it. I'm learning how to row. I'm part of the Louisville Adaptive Rowing Foundation now. I'm on the board of that.
Nice.
And I'm just a SaaS sales executive. Call myself a former, well, what do we call it? Recovering small business owner turned SaaS sales executive.
That's what I'm going to title the. That's what I'm going to title the episode: is recovering small business owner to SaaS top performer.
Yeah, man. And I mean, I'll do a little plug on what converts. So if you are a seller or a founder, or work with any if you do have a marketing agency, what we do at What Converts, we're an all-in-one lead tracking platform. So we give you the ability to understand how a stranger becomes a visitor, becomes a lead to your website or your organization. We're able to track phone calls, web forms, chats, e-commerce events, offline events, and we're very inexpensive. So it's not like going to HubSpot and paying $750 a month to see that. It's very reasonable, and a lot of people white label it, so they'll use it for all their customers and reporting. Yeah.
That's awesome. So if any of my listeners want to reach out and get in touch with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Mr. Life Bar, and my LinkedIn is, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably my biggest social media channel right now. It's Chase Barmore. And I'll be coming out with, I do want to do an email list and website soon, just for my own personal brand. And I'm trying to connect people with different ways of doing strategies, and I'm connecting a bunch of different startups. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm on the Slack channel in Jesse's land. So if you join that, we'll Slack it up.
Sounds great, man. Hey, a pleasure getting to know you better. I know you already met before the show, but this was a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. And until next time, we should make you a regular on the show.
Hell yeah, man. And guess what? I'll tell you this. This is one thing that I did for Jesse. Okay. So Jesse landed me the biggest sales, the biggest job that I've ever had in my life. Go team. And you know what I did is I sent him a bottle of bourbon. That's just the Kentucky boy in me. And a bottle of bourbon will go a long way.
Yeah, a glass of it's gotten us through this episode. So and it got me to confess that I don't like driving to my audience. So just
send us that Tesla, Elon. Come on. We need
I need Teslas, a Tesla.
Need a self-driving Tesla.
I need to not be behind the wheel. Well, all right, man. Have a great weekend. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And
cool, man. Well, happy to be here anytime, and happy to reach out to me. I'm happy to help anybody. Truly mean it.